Welcome to Gobookmart. Today we're delighted to have with us a very, very special guest. Patricia Dunn is the author of the young adult novel Rebels by Accident. Her writing has appeared on Salon, The Village Voice, The Nation, LA Weekly, The Christian Science Mentor, and an anthology Love Inshallah, The Secret Love Lives of American Muslim Women. Patricia has been the senior director of the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College and is the co-founder of the Joe Papaleo Writers Workshop in Petra, Italy. She's an Italian-American, Bronx-raised rebel and has traveled across the world. These days, however, she can be found in her living room couch working on her next novel or zooming with aspiring and established writers, of course in a suit and tie. Her first novel for adults, Last Stop on the Sixth, was published by the Bordighera Press in fall of 2021. Patricia holds an MFA in creative writing from the Sarah Lawrence College. Welcome to Go Bookmart, Patricia. How are
Thank
you?
you so much. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Yeah, so just to kickstart the interview, so your newest book came out in November 2021.
Yeah, it's right
How
here.
do,
Yeah.
how do you feel seeing such an important journey come to fruition, and how was the journey, and what can you tell us about your book?
Well, my first book, like you mentioned, Rebels by Accident, I wrote after I had started this book 25 years ago.
Wow.
And people are like 25 years. So from the time I wrote it to the time it came out was 25 years. I wasn't writing it the whole time. It was many versions, but I had put it away and then took it out. The encouragement of a very good friend and another writer and co-teacher said, go back to that. And I said, no, I don't want to. But when I did, I realized I had kind of Grace Paley, who's a short story writer, used to say, sometimes you have to grow into the writer you need to be or the person that needs to be to finish a story or a book as it has to. And I think I had grown enough as a person and a writer to be able to finish the book. And so to finally see it come into the world after all of those years of thinking it wouldn't, and also working very hard at it, it's like, it feels wonderful. I think that what's very interesting about what I learned from this book, because this is very it was very autobiographical, and now it's semi-autobiographical, but the truth that I wanted to get to in the story, about family and coming home and, what we believe about our families and what we learn to believe is really true. I mean, all of the themes came across in this version because I fictionalized things more and I backed off from what was the reality that it was originally based on. So anyway, but I feel like it was a good lesson in, like, if you don't give up, people talk about talent that writers have. I think tenacity gets you a lot farther. And if you really have a story that you need to write, and then we all do, because all our stories matter, you just need to hang in there and stick with it and have writers and other people around you that get it and that can give you the support, because especially with books, it's like running a marathon, and it takes a lot of training and a lot of patience to get that done. So that was a long answer to your question, but anyway.
But that was a very inspirational answer to start the interview with. So my next question is, your first novel obviously was young adult. So what prompted you to switch genres, and how different was your writing process?
Well, it's funny. My young adult was, I started writing, I didn't consciously write young adult. I had put this book that did get me my first agent, Last Stop on the Sixth. It had a different title. And I had put this aside, and I was looking to not even start something else, but just, I needed to do something else. And I was working at Sarah Lawrence College at the time, and, you can take classes. So I took a writing class, to get myself writing again. And this is after I had my MFA. So, so as writers, we're always learning and taking classes. And this class was actually with a theater person, and she was a playwright, and she had us doing these writing prompts. And one of the prompts, I think it was Describe Your Hand. I mean, it was something very simple, but it got me to write in a voice of this young woman that I did not want to write about because I did not want to write in the voice of a teenager. I I like teenagers more than babies, but they're a tough group, and I had no interest in writing in this voice. But every time I tried to write something else, her story just really, I mean, it sounds cliche, but that character kept showing up. And so I just finally gave over to it. And at the time, young adult wasn't as popular. I mean, Harry Potter had just started, was a craze, but it wasn't like you went into a bookstore here in the United States and there wasn't a young adult section. Like now, it's the biggest section, right? Young adult, like, is taken over. So it wasn't conscious. It just, because at the time the character was of 15, that's why I got put into that category. So I don't think I necessarily consciously switched genres. I think I just write the stories I need to write. And when I went back to the story, it was for adults. And the story that I just finished now, that hopefully will get out into the world, is a father-daughter relationship, but it's a thriller. It's a serial killer book. The father is a serial killer. He's also an exterminator, so that's similar to this book. But I don't necessarily stick with genres. I stick with stories, and characters come to me, and that's kind of what I follow through on. So
Yeah.
I probably would be better off and be more successful as a writer if I stuck in one genre, but it's just not what happens to me naturally, right? I'm more of like, okay, this is the story I want to tell, and then I figure out what the genre is from there.
Exactly. It's a natural process. Yeah. So your protagonist is an Italian American woman. How did you stay true to that cultural element? Is it because you yourself are Italian? And what?
Why did I write about somebody who's Italian American? Is that what was the question?
Yeah, and how did
Yeah.
what kind of research did it take, or did it take any research, or was it easy?
Well, it's funny because this story is based on Pelham Bay, which is it's in the Bronx, which is a borough of New York City, and it's the last stop on a 6 train. If you're coming from the city, and well, the Bronx is part of the bigger New York City, but if you're from the Bronx, you call Manhattan the city. So if you're coming from Manhattan, it's the last stop. But if you're from where I grew up, it's the first stop, right, on this train, and then there's nothing after that, right? So I was writing about the neighborhood that I grew up in, and my family's Italian American, but because everybody else was born in Italy in our neighborhood, except for us, we were really called the Americans, right? So, which, it's kind of funny when you think about it, but so we were always a little bit on the outside, which I think is probably why I became a writer. Because, when you're on the outside of things, it just kind of makes you look at things a little bit differently. So I didn't think when I first started writing, because I started writing about the stories, I kind of knew, and that I did have to do, you think that, oh, I'm writing about things I know, I don't have to do research, but I wound up having to do more research than expected, because things that you assume, you start looking at it and you're like, oh, I didn't know about that. I didn't know that Pelham Bay Park is the largest park in the, city park in New York, and one of the largest city parks in the country. I didn't know that this happened here. There were all these things that I assumed. So I wound up having to do a lot more research than I thought I did. And it also takes place in 1991 on the verge of the beginning of the Gulf War. Like myself, the person in the book who had left home for 10 years is an activist, and she's an anti-war activist. So I lived that time as an activist, and I was in protests, and I got arrested. I did all that, but your memory, doesn't always remember things exactly. So I wound up having to do a lot of, to get timing right and dates right. That took a lot of research, a lot more than I expected I would have to do. So yeah, people think that fiction, you just sit down and make it up. And in a lot of ways, you do have to almost do as much or more research than you do when you're writing nonfiction, because you don't want to create a world that has, one little thing that's off, and you're going to throw people right out of the story. So you want to make sure you get those facts right. So.
Yeah. So family and the twisted, convoluted relationships in it, form a very important part of your book. And why did
Mhm.
you decide to talk about this so much, and how did you carry it out effectively?
Um, I think a lot, without realizing it, even my Rebels too is still all about family. Family's a big thing. I mean, I think we all write about family in a lot of ways. I don't know, I'm sure many writers, but someone once said, we're all writing about the same themes, right? Like love, death, and I don't know, there's one other one. And I think like family and family dynamics, I come from what isn't, it feels big, right? We're a very loud family. And when you're in my family, like, you know, my brother's like girlfriends and people's ex-boyfriends and ex-husbands, and they're still come to event, like when you're in my family and you're never out, right? So um and then when I moved to California, and then you start making your own, a different family, and the families that you choose, the idea of what makes a family is always interesting to me. So I don't know if it's another thing. It's like I could sit here and sound all smart about why I chose to do things. But I think what happens with a lot of writers, and as somebody who's also been teaching writing for a long time, you don't necessarily choose your stories, they choose you. And I think family is just something that always seems to just come out in what I write. And this particular family, I really wanted to write about working class people, because I don't see them represented. And I get from a lot of people who've read Last Stop on the Sixth, whatever their background is. I've had people, just yesterday, I was talking to a librarian, not Italian American, and she related to it. And I get people from all different backgrounds because they all understand what it's like to be caught up in a family that may love you, but the drama and the secrets and the things that aren't said and all those kind of things. So I think it's kind of universal in that way. And people have also said to me that they like to see this story as something that they can relate to because they see themselves in. And I think it's because, it is about working class, I guess you could say, real people, as opposed to a lot of the shows, it's not about millionaires or like, those people that like are kind of, we just imagine about or we see in magazines. So I think that's something that was important for me to want to touch on as well.
Right. But also, apart from family, politics also plays an important part in your book. So, why did you give a political angle to this book that is inherently the story of a dysfunctional family? Because you did this with Rebel's accident too, right?
So why did I'm sorry, just repeat. So why did I
Give a
bring family into the, did you say that one more time? What, did I bring my own family into what?
no,
I'm
no,
sorry,
no.
just repeat. No, the
Yeah,
politics.
yeah. Why did you bring a political angle to a story that's inherently about a dysfunctional family?
Okay. Because, well, when people say, there's this expression here, like, oh, don't talk about religion and don't talk about politics because you don't want to
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
well, to me, you cannot talk about politics. I mean, because it is, to me, politics is personal, right? The political is like, everything is political, and it's our whole lives are affected by what people happens in this world. And I think I was writing also about my experience as somebody who was an activist who was all about trying to change systems. The character in the book thinks she, and this was fictionalized, but she thinks she caused her brother's accident. Um, and that's why she runs away, and she becomes an activist later, but she couldn't save him. And so she tries to save the world, and she winds up saving herself. At least you hope, or that's the idea of it. But in my case, I think I thought I could maybe save the world without consciously thinking of it that way. And I don't know if I believe that now, but, I do admire people, especially younger people who really are out there trying to change the mess that we've all, people of my generation and generations before have created. And so I don't think that you can write about family with, there's politics within the family, but there's also the world around us is going to affect what's happening with the family. And in this particular book, whether we go to war or not, I mean, in the real world, we know we did, but they don't know that. is a big part of what impacts the story and the events. And so I think I wrote about it because those things are important. I guess now, because it's, we're in 2021 as opposed to 1991, they consider it historical fiction. And it's, to me, I crack up because, I was born in the 60s, so I don't think of it as a historical, but I do think that I like to read books that are placed in the world and that the world events have an impact on everyday life. Because whether we want it, even if we try to put ourselves in a bubble, we can't. What happens outside is going to impact us and our family and how we, how we live and what we have to do, whether, to put food on the table or, pay to get education or healthcare or whatever those issues are. They come in every day.
Yeah.
That was a long answer though, but anyway.
So like I mentioned in the bio, you do have an MFA in creative writing and you do teach as well. So how does education and academia impact your writing, if it does in any way?
Well, I started at Barnard and then went to UCLA. I was all about, at a very young age, a lot of my friends didn't even think about wanting to go to college. And I knew that I wanted to go to college because I wanted to see the world and get out. And so I worked hard and I got into the college of my dreams. And then after 2.5 years, I was doing fine, but I got in a car with some friends and I drove across country. And and my brother was a child actor. And they used to call him Wood for Hollywood as a nickname. But he didn't go to LA, I did. And I didn't want to be an actress. I think I just needed to leave home. And when I got to LA, I wanted to, I think I spent more time protesting than I did in class. So when I came back after 11 years, I wound up going to another purchase where I got my undergraduate degree and realized, okay, what am I, I thought, what do I really want to do? And I knew what I really wanted to write. And I got an MFA because I think it gave me permission to be able to write for 2 years and helped me be able to call myself a writer and to be around other writers who I wasn't around people who some people, but I didn't have a community, which is, I now realize, is essential for any writer, of writers to support me and who got it, right? Who understood why when people ask you, what do you want for your birthday? And you say, I just want to be left alone to write for the day. And, your mom thinks that there's something wrong with you. And are you okay? And you're like, yes, I really just want to be able to write. Writers get that. So it gave me, I'm still writing with some of the people that I met in that first workshop I took, but I think it helped me be able to call myself a writer. But then education took over when I started teaching writing. That's when I think I learned more about writing than I ever imagined, because working with other writers, especially with their works in progress, taught me more about my own writing than I ever imagined. And also I co-taught for a lot of years with another fabulous writer, Jim and Han. And I've also taught with another fabulous writer, Marsha Bradley and Kate Brandt and Alexander Soisis. And all of these people, we still write together in writing workshops, in a writing group. We've been together now 20-something years, and working with other writers to help other aspiring writers really teaches you a lot about what works. Because sometimes you can see in other people's work things that you can't see in your own. And then when you go back to your own, you're like, oh, okay, I know what I got to do here now. So I think as a writer, whether you get that formal education or not, you need to find that community somewhere of writers. And I think that's what the best thing, I had wonderful mentors and teachers in my MFA program, but what really did it for me and what kept me writing was meeting those writers that I still know today. That's what really made the big difference. So, yeah. And the world as a writer, I always say, it's like the blessing and also the curse that you're always a little bit on the outside looking at things, because that writer's mind is always thinking about is this a story, or what's a story, even if you're not doing it consciously. But that's also sometimes a great thing, because there's been a lot of hard things that I've faced, a lot of us face. And the thing that we have as writers is when things get really rough, we can always say, well, maybe I can write about this someday. Even if you don't, it kind of gives you that kind of, I don't know, feeling of like there's a purpose to it, whether there is or not. So anyway, and maybe also I'm a little bit of a control person, and I get to control the worlds I write about. But well, I sometimes, because your characters do go off on their own. But I think my MFA helped me just find that writing community more than anything. And in those days, now we're going back to, I don't know, when did I, 20 something years ago, you didn't really need an MFA to teach, but like you do now. So if you do want to teach, you need those credentials mean more now in terms of like jobs than they did in the past. Even publishing your work, it sometimes helps. But that's at the point then, it wasn't about that. I actually left a good job and took my 401k to pay, which my retirement plan. I pulled all that money out, which I don't know if it was smart or stupid. And that's what I actually paid to use that money to get my MFA. So,
Right.
But formal education isn't always what a person needs. If you can find that writing community somewhere, you can really, that's what I think every writer really needs more than anything else.
Right. So do you have a fixed creative process? And if you do, what is it? And also tied into that is the eternal question, right? How to deal with writer's block when you just can't push through that?
Well, so I could tell you what I tell my students and what helps them. You know, life is going to hit you no matter what. There's going to be good things or bad things, or a lot of things are going to happen. And there's going to be really legitimate reasons not to write all the time, right? I mean, there's just so much happening. But if you just can take 10 minutes a day, and I mean 10 minutes of writing, not editing and changing sentences, but where you time yourself and you just write, whether it's by hand or on your computer, and you don't stop. And then the next day you take that last line of what you wrote the day before and you continue with that, but just at 10 minutes a day, or if you're working on whatever you're working on, just will make such a difference. So when you do have a block of time, whether maybe it's on a weekend or whatever, that 2-3 hours that you can sit down and write, you're already connected to the work. And it's kind of like the old cars where you had to warm up, you already warmed up. When I used to not write every day, like for that 10 minutes, because I'm usually very busy. So I would just like wait until I had the block of time on the weekend. It would take me half of the time I had just reacquainting myself with my story and my characters. But when I started doing that 10 minutes a day, I just was able to just jump right into the work. So when I do that, it's very effective and it helps a lot. And you'd be surprised at how much you get written, especially when you shut off that editor's mind or the critic in our head. So what I learn is that when I get into that, like, I can't do this, or I stink, or why am I even bothering? I tell my students, which is what I learned to do from somebody else, is I can't remember what that person called it, the teacher called it, but like we call it the dump page, where I just keep typing. I open another document, or sometimes even the same document, whatever it is that's coming to mind, and all that negative stuff, I just keep typing it out. And then you get tired of typing or writing that negative stuff a lot faster, and than you would if you just sat there thinking it, and it actually gets out of your head. And then you move, and because you're writing, you're in that process, then you wind up getting back to your story. So that's kind of how I deal with that block. And really, the answer that every writer never wants to hear when they ask about how do you write or how do you do it, because we all want to know that there's some magic time that you wake up in the morning, or like some secret to that. Secret is write. You just have to write. That is the secret to everything. So when you're not feeling like good about writing, or it's because you're not writing. When you're stuck with your story, it's because you're not writing. And so even if you're writing on napkins, or even if you're in the bathroom, right? You take that 10 minutes, even 5 minutes, and just write, because the process of writing will get you over the writer's block and everything else. And And again, another thing that also helps with blocks is sometimes having that, again, I'm going to go back to a community of writers that not only get your writing and can give you like feedback on your writing itself, but that can get you in your life. And so when things are hard in your life and you're saying to them, I'm never writing again, they'll pat you on the back and they'll say, that's okay. And the next day they'll tell you, all right, get off your bum and get back to work, because they understand what it's like to live that life. And, and sometimes you just need to let that little baby in you that's like, crying, oh, I can't do this. You just need to get it out to somebody that understands. And then that helps too. So, but really the answer is always going to be, when you have a problem as a writer, you got to write. Even if you're just writing about not writing, or that makes a difference.
Yeah, but what I also meant was your writing process when it comes to writing a novel. So do you write, chronologically from beginning to end?
Oh.
Different pieces, scenes.
And so I am one of these people that I do. It's changed. It really depends on it's changed somewhat. It depends on the project, but I think it always for me starts with usually it starts with a writing prompt. I hate writing prompts, but I always give them. And every book I've ever wrote was even like all I know, basic things, all I don't know, but it starts with something. And I usually get the voice first of a character, right? Something comes to me. And then I start writing in that voice, and and I don't know what the story is. So through my process, as I discover the story, then I can start maybe, outlining a little bit. But what I usually do is I write a really rough first draft. There's a writer called Anne Lamott. She's got a great book on writing. It's, all about the, different things. And she's got something called Shitty First Drafts, which is basically like, we all have to like write that bad draft and then those, to get it on paper. And then all of the answers, because, you're a novelist, you can do all these things and you can break rules, but your book has its rules and you don't know what they are until you get that first draft done. So when I have that first draft, then I outline. So it's called the reverse outline in a sense. So I outline what I have, right? I will put down each chapter or each scene, who's in it, the action, and why that scene happens now, why the scene followed the scene that came before, right? And then I actually, there's programs that you can do this. People do it on the computer. I do it, what we would say old school, on index cards. And then I look at the index cards on a bulletin board and I see, okay, so what does all this mean, right? It's kind of like that detective trying to put together a puzzle. And then I try to figure out, what I need, what I don't need, and what is the theme, and what am I trying to say here? And that's when I start figuring out, all right, so if this is what I want to say, how do I earn that ending that I want to get to, right? Yeah. And what's my plot and my climax, and do I have one, and where is it? And then I go back. I mean, it's a process. I mean, you write, revision really is where you figure out your story. But you need to kind of have that whole, maybe it's kind of like that family, the chaotic family I talked about, like you got to write the chaos for you to basically figure it out. And I don't necessarily, in a story, it's not always a linear story, but sometimes it is. I often complicate my first drafts. I have too many characters, too many things happening. That's like my Achilles heel as a writer. And then I have to go back and figure out, like, okay, I had 5 characters. I really only need 2. But those 2 are going to be more like developed because I can take things from those other characters that I'm now getting rid of. And I've overcomplicated this, instead of making the person just walk through the door, I've had them do 5 other things, climb out a window, so I simplify, more. I wish I could find the easier way to get there, but it's not always so clear cut. my mind, like I can remember stories, I can never remember names, but if I read somebody's story, I'll remember it 20 years later. So I can remember those pieces in my head, but it does help to kind of like look at it on a piece of paper and then figure out what I want to do. And I always play with time and play. And then I wound up in the books that I write. It happens every time. I play with time a lot, and then it always goes back to a more simple time frame. I might have multiple point of views or do different things in books, but or stories. But then in the end, I always tend to make the time frame a lot shorter. My first book took place over, I don't know, 5 days. This next book, Last Stop on the 6th, the whole book takes place over a period of 4 days, 4 or 5 days. When I think about that, I don't even do it consciously, but that's what it really seems to do. In the book that I just finished, it really takes place, there's one storyline that takes place over a different time, but the main storyline really takes place over, maybe less than a week. Actually, it's a couple of days for that storyline, from the beginning of an event to the solving of the case. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it depends on the story. But I tend to kind of compress time, and a lot of things happen in a very short period of time. Whether that's good or not, I don't know, but that's what seems to happen.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've written for a lot of literary magazines as well. So, I'm assuming that must be short form literature, short stories and essays. But correct me if I'm not sure.
No, do I write short too? Did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I write a lot. I may also, I write essays, nonfiction for a
Yeah.
while. Yeah, I mean, I've probably made more money on nonfiction because, it's easier to get paid that way. Yeah, I actually like the short. See, I love, short form works well for me, which is funny because I can do the novel, or I'm very good at the 800, 1,000 word essay, right?
Yeah.
It's the middle place, that like short story that's like 8,000 or words or 5,000. I'm not great at the middle place. So, but my nonfiction voice, which is like where the essays, personal essays come in a lot. And I guess it's also from my journalist background. Yeah, that is a form I like very much because I can focus in on usually it's a specific topic, and then I can, it's easier to do circle back, you start with the beginning and then, the whole, your arc of your essay, and then you come back. And I like that form. It could be, a lot of times it could be harder. It could take me almost as much time to get that essay right. I mean, people think you start with a poem or a story, and then you graduate to the novel. There are different forms, and it can take you as long it could take you longer to write a good story than it may take to write a novel. So it's just because they're very forms, and poetry for me, and believe me, I've tried poetry a lot in my life, but I'm not a poet. It could be to write a great poem, you got to pay attention to every single word, right? So, so I do write short forms, but mostly the short forms I write are nonfiction. They're not fiction.
We talked about, sorry, go ahead.
No, I've written a few stories, that have been published, but mostly it's been nonfiction. Yeah, my stories that are fiction tend to be more novel in the scope. So.
Yeah. You talked about the fact that nonfiction gets paid more, but which one do you as a writer find more fulfilling, and how do the techniques differ?
So what do I find is writing more fulfilling? And when I say get paid more, I'm not talking about tons. I'm just talking about, like, if you're writing an essay for a magazine, they're going to give you, and you're writing a story, a lot of times, it's a little bit harder. I don't know if, I think that with novels, because they're longer, I mean, it's like I said, it's like a marathon. It's a long haul. I like the short form because you could get that immediate, like, fix and that like gratification when it works, because it's shorter, right? And it's easier to kind of, I guess, control all the pieces. Um, and a novel can be frustrating because it can take years. I mean, it takes years usually for me. Even a year is still a lot longer than like I can write mostly an essay. You know, I can write an essay in a week, even a couple of days sometimes, depending on like the subject, and you know, and you can make it work, and it's great. So I think for immediate gratification, sometimes the shorter form is like is great. But I think they're both. I learn now at my age, you know, I'm proud of every year I earn. So I'll just say my age is 57. Um, and I've been promoting my book, and you know, and I do a lot to help other people promote their books, and all of that stuff is all great and it's nice. But really, what you want when you write, when you're a writer, the most enjoyable part, you'll get to that point when you realize, is the writing.
Yeah.
So I think whatever it is that I'm writing, if I'm writing, it feels great. That's when I get the most satisfaction. I mean, of course, I'm not writing just for myself. Otherwise, I just keep a diary. I'm writing because I want an audience and people to read my work, right? So you get that moment. So you get that moment if somebody accepts your work, like there's that like blip of joy, and then it's like, okay, and then, you know, people will read it and you'll get maybe some great feedback that'll feel good. Critics that may not like something, and that'll feel bad. And but the pure, if there's any pure joy in all of this, it's actually when you're sitting down and you're in what, you know, some people call the zone, and you just get so lost in the world of these characters or the story that you're writing that you don't even realize that it's like, you know, 8 hours has passed, or you've missed dinner. And you know, because especially unless you have people at home, like my kid's home or whatever, you know, she's an adult now. But when, you know, when your family's like, you know, interrupting, but if you're by yourself and you're in that zone, that's like, you know, I don't know, that I think that's one of my favorite places to be. And it's hard to actually get there, and it's hard to find the time to be there. And it also can be very addictive. So it's hard to, so sometimes I've had to force myself to, even when I was on a roll, to say I have to stop at this time and move on to something else, because then you wind up like waking up, you know, I mean, it becomes so much part of you that you don't even want to like see anybody or talk to anybody. You just want to be writing. And that can be hard too. I think that's the thing with writers. It's like, we're always writing or thinking about writing or thinking about not writing. You know, it's hard for us to take a break from it, right? So, yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, writing's hard. So I tell people, you know, Grace Paley, again, a great short story writer. She's passed away, but you know, I got to see her speak twice, and she used to teach where I went to school, but she had been retired then. Used to say, if you don't love it, do something else, because it's so hard, and there are things that are going to bring more, you know, satisfaction in your life. And then I had a student one day, and I used to tell this to my class all the time: if you don't love it, leave the class now and you'll get your money back. And nobody ever walked out. But at the end of one class one day, a woman came up to me and said, I don't always love it, but I have no choice. And I realized that was closer to the truth, because we don't always love it. But there's something in us that has no choice. We have to write. So if you have to write, get the support to do it, and get people around you that understand it and that are going to value it, and that is not going to, you know, make you feel like you should be doing something that, you know, pays more or does something, or, you know, because people will say to you, well, you're still working on that book. Like they think you just like sit down and you do it in 2 minutes, or they'll tell you, hey, you should write this story. Like, oh yeah, okay, I'll just do that tomorrow. No. So if you have no choice, you know, take classes, find a community of writers, just do whatever you can just to get the support to keep doing it, because you have no choice. So don't fight it, just do it. I guess that's what I would say, but it helps when you love it. And you may not love it all the time, but if you get joy from it some of the time, then it's worth it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So are you a writer yourself?
Me, I do write.
Great.
I do write.
And fiction, nonfiction?
Fiction. I've actually finished the first draft of my very first novel, but
Well, congratulations. No, well, I would, earn it and celebrate it, because what I would also tell writers, we never celebrate these moments because the number, I don't know, I'm not a statistic person, and I read the numbers once and it's probably changed, but the number of people who want to write the book, like, let's say this many people want to write a book, right?
Yeah.
And then the number of people that even start might be here, but the number that finish is so small. So if 100 people start a book, maybe less than one of those people, like one person, might actually finish. So it is a huge accomplishment to actually even start a book, but to finish is amazing. So celebrate it, because we never celebrate those important moments. So that's great.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so great that to hear from you, especially because you're such an accomplished writer.
Yes. No, well, I know look, I bet you're a very accomplished writer too, even though you don't know that yet. So, are you in a writing program? Did you, what did you
Not,
study writing?
I'm studying literature right now, but I'm a Bachelor of Arts right now, so I'm not yet in the postgraduate stage.
Oh, okay, great. So well, that's the other thing is writers think that they also have to like go into creative, I mean, you could study creative writing and it is great, but you also want to, like, the more you study the world, the more you have things to write about. That's one thing we got to
Yeah.
remember too, right? Because after a while, that's why I think we see so many movies and TVs and there's always writers in them, because that's what writers know. And it's always great to see, oh, here's a character that's not a writer, so that's great. And where are
Thank
you, where do you live? Where are you,
I stay in Mumbai.
oh, you're Mumbai. Okay. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's yes. I've came close to going, and both times something happened, like in my personal life, where I couldn't, but one day I'll get there. I was actually going to go from Dubai once, and something changed and I had to go back to New York, but yeah, but someday I'll get there. And it's great that you're doing this with your organization, that you support other writers and you're trying to get people to read books, because it's amazing how, I just went and talked at the library that I used to go to as a kid. And where I grew up, people didn't go to library, we didn't go to libraries, right?
Yeah.
They were there, but you only went there if you had to. And I remember being embarrassed to tell people I was going to the library. So I would just make up a story and sneak off to the library and then pull books.
Oh,
And I'd pull books off the shelf. And in those days, there was no like ratings of movies or, nobody like paid attention to what you were reading. So I read things that were probably very inappropriate for a 10 or 11 and 12-year-old, right? I was reading adult things that I probably shouldn't have been reading, but I used to just love to just like sneak off and just like read. And so I got to go back to that library yesterday after 40, oh my God, after, yeah, 45 years. And physically, it looks like the same place, which is a little strange. But it just made me think about how librarians are heroes, because they really try to get kids to read. And I don't care what you're reading on. Everyone thinks you got to read that book, in that physical form. But if you're comfortable reading on the screen or, a device or whatever, it doesn't matter what you're reading on. I think it's just read, because you open your mind in different ways. And I think that's so important when people try to promote reading and stories, because it's the only thing that helps us. If this world has any hope, and I want to believe it does, it's going to be because of things that bring us closer together. I mean, I can complain all I want about technology, but technology is why I'm able to talk to somebody right now in Mumbai, and you can talk to somebody right now in Stamford, Connecticut, that would not have happened before, right? Or and at one point it could happen, but it would have cost us like $1 million for a phone call, right? So I think books are also a way of us getting to know other people and other stories, even fantasy, or science fiction, just teaches us about the world and things that, we never would have discovered otherwise. So I know that, I mean, I'm not usually very sentimental, but I think sometimes when it comes to this stuff, I am, because I've watched books change. I know books have changed my life, and I've watched it change other people's lives. So I think as a writer, this sounds very cliche. Yes, I make a joke and I say, oh, you don't have to read my book, just buy it. But when somebody comes to me and they've read my book and actually somebody just recently said, I'm not a reader and I barely ever read, but somebody gave me this book and I couldn't put it down. And actually really, I was able to read the whole thing. And I was like, that made me so happy because it made me realize like that, wow, maybe something that I do can get people to like read about other stories in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. I don't know. So that it does make it like, that's, I think, why some of this is worth it. And not even if you could change life, but if you could just, I don't know, give somebody a moment of joy or whatever, or something, or get them to just think a little bit. I know that when I think about anything that's different, when I read a book or read even students' work, I know I learned so much about the world just through what people write about. And I'm talking about fiction too, not, not, it doesn't have to be nonfiction, because I can't, the news is fiction in a different way, but that's a whole other story. So anyway, so it's excited for you and congratulations, and keep writing, because it's wonderful. And it's wonderful that you want to talk to people about what they're writing too. So
Thank you so much. But tell me about some of your favorite books, because you did bring it up.
my favorite books. Okay,
Yeah.
people, let's see. All right.
Literature you
So
keep going back to.
yeah, I know. People always ask that, and I'm always like, oh, what do I say? All right, well, I do have to. I mean, not just because they're friends, but one of my favorite books is written by Jim and Han, and it's called A Small Revolution, and it came out a couple of years ago, and I watched that book take on many, because I was in a writing workshop and I worked with her. It took on many different forms. But that final book, I think, is fabulous. And I'm really excited that her second book is coming out in 2023. And it's also, in sense, it takes place in an historical period in time, like when certain things were happening in Korea at the time, although the actual action is in a dorm room in New York, in upstate New York or upstate Pennsylvania or something. But the way the book, not only the story, which I think is amazing, but the way the structure, it's just like, I love it. So she's one of my favorite writers. Another person, like, who I will constantly love, my favorite book, probably one of my favorite books in the world, is 100 Years of Solitude.
Oh,
So,
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
yes. And I can tell you right now, when people ask me, what is it about? I can never really tell them what's it about, but it's my favorite book, because what he does in
I
that book
totally get
is
you.
like, yeah, it's like, it's a magical experience. You just have to just like go with it, right? And what he does in that book, like, he breaks every law, if you studied what people used to say, the laws of writing a story, like, they're all broken, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful. And also, oh my God, another book is Kafka on the Shore. So it's,
I have
yes.
both of these on my shelf here.
Oh, okay. See, so and I'm not even able to read it. So just want to like tell you, whoever's like going to be watching this, I'm not just picking your book. That's so funny. Yeah, love that. Nonfiction writers, there are many, especially like the memoirs. There's a memoir right now, It's a collection of like essays. It's called Tomboyland. Melissa Falvavino. Love that book. I'm trying to think. More contemporary writers. Michael Salinger, anything that he writes, I love. Kathleen Hill, Joan Silber, Myra Goldberg. Let's see, Barbara Jocelyn. These are all writers who they all write about different things in different ways, and some of them are like more offbeat and different structurally than others, but all those books, for whatever, well, I know what reasons, they're able to just like, they pull me into their story and the voice. And when I can't put a book down, because I'm all over the place in my head too, it means that there's something magic that writer was able to do that I just love. There's let's see, I can just, Carolyn Farrell, Miss Metropolitan. That's a book that just like hit. I think it's up for all these awards. And I think that was her first book, came out oh my God, when I started graduate school, and this is her second book. And that first book was a collection, Don't Erase Me, which is a beautiful collection of stories. And this novel that she's written is just, it's amazing. So I could go on and on about a lot of different writers, because there's so many wonderful writers. But those are the stories that I get kind of lost in. So I'm really I mean, I also read like a lot of serial killer books too, because I'm very obsessed with them. I think because a very famous serial killer called the Son of Sam had killed someone in my neighborhood, a friend's cousin, and I was 13 that summer when it was all happening. So I got very obsessed with the whole idea of serial killers. But then as a character, Hannibal Lecter is one of my favorite characters of all time, because any writer that could make me kind of root or like somebody who eats people, you know, like, and does these horrible things, means that that writer has like done something to really make these characters like fully developed. You know, like they always say, you got to make your characters flawed, but to take a very flawed character and make them likable, because you know, everything in your head is saying, oh, how could I like, it makes people uncomfortable to want to like a serial killer. But the fact that that the writer pulls that off is pretty amazing. Yeah, I'm very like, I love, even when I like page turners, like The Kite Runner was an amazing book.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, I'm also very resentful of like, yeah, The Kite Runner, Gabriel Marquez, you know, these doctors that go and write these amazing books. I'm like, come on, you're already like professional doctors. You have to be writers too. But it's like, you know, these books, they're able to create these stories that just pull you into another world. And I think that's why they're so wonderful. So, yeah, a lot of the books that I love, most of the books that have been on the Booker Prize, a lot of the nomination, a lot of the ones that are usually, the winners are great, but I read a lot of the ones that are like, you know, like shortlisted or nominated, because they're great. And I like, you know, Gabriel Marquez. I read a lot of books also in translation. I can't read the original language because I don't know it, but there's just something that also, because it just gives me, it's just a different, like, often aesthetic that I get, or a texture that I don't always sometimes get in, you know, strictly US literature. So it's really great to be exposed to these wonderful stories, and it makes me want to like read them in the original language. But anyway, I'm kind of too lazy to do that, but maybe someday. So I don't know. What's your, do you have favorite authors?
Yeah, a lot of the ones you mentioned. But also, I want to ask you, have you read any Indian literature per se? You'd like
Have I
to
read
mention?
anything what?
Indian literature, Indian writing in English.
Oh, you mean like Andiana Roy? Did I pronounce her name? Yeah.
Arundhati Roy, yeah, God
Yeah.
of Small Things,
Yes, I'm very,
The
very
Mystery
like
of
that.
Utmost Happiness.
Yeah.
Oh,
So yeah,
yeah,
she's amazing.
yeah,
She's actually like so amazing that some writers, like, you just like, okay, I can't read them because they make me feel bad about my writing. and and then I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I love reading her, but that's not the writer I am. So you know, I'm not going to be that writer. So I could be okay with it. So yeah, no, I'm trying to think of, oh my God, there's many. I'm bad with names, like so bad with titles. I can tell you the whole stories, but let me think of, yes, if you name somebody, I can tell you like, oh God, I'm looking at I just moved all my books. Cause no, there was a while that I was reading only East Asian writers, and I'm trying to think of who else. Oh my God, there was somebody else who it'll come to me, but yes. And actually a few of my students, like, who are I shouldn't say my favorites, because I don't want to make my other students feel bad, because I love their work too. But one person, I hope her book will come out soon, and you know, I don't want to mention her name and whatever, because she may not want it right now. But yeah, she's, you know, her family's from Pakistan, and like her stories are incredible. Oh yes, there's a oh my God, there's this. I wish I can remember the writer that I'm thinking about that's from Pakistan is amazing. It'll come to me. And I, you know, I like, you know, I like Rushdie. I
yeah.
like what he does. I admire, you know, the structure, like how he takes chances in his writing. And I don't mean just about subject matter or whatever. I think he just, you know, he's in, you know, he'll like, he breaks rules and he does it well, you know, or whatever
Yeah.
rules it may be. I don't know. So who's one of your favorite writers? It's as soon as we get off this thing, I'm gonna like remember this other writer. She's very popular in the 80s. Well, she's very popular now probably, but oh my God, she was is under, I mean, God, what was her name? Oh my
Do you
God.
remember the stories?
Say her name again.
Do you remember the stories?
I can remember the story. Yeah. She wrote a lot. Well, the one story I love so much was about a woman who came to the States with her husband,
Joe
and she.
Papaleo.
Yes, thank you. Oh my God,
Ah,
that would have killed. See, I didn't even have to say much, but one line. Um,
diaspora, Indian diaspora
yes,
is Joe
yes,
Papaleo.
yeah, no, but I loved that book. And what I loved about it, and I was also really impressed, is that, you know, it's very like, you know, as that woman, you feel her claustrophobia because like she's kind of almost trapped in this world, right? Of like, here she is, this whole other, you know, I mean, she comes to the United States, we're this huge country, but she's trapped in this world, in this, and it was done so well, even though we're not reading about like big things don't have to happen for books to have a lot of tension and drama in them. And I think she does that so well. Like she takes the ordinary, right? I teach a class like about, you know, it's called The Stories in Every Day, and it's about taking the ordinary in life and making it extraordinary. And she does that so well in that book. So anyway, yeah, yeah. So she's another favorite one. So anyway,
That's great. That's great.
yeah.
So finally, my last question, can you leave us with one lesson that you specifically learned while writing this book?
While writing this book, well, because it took 25 years, I think it's going to be the same thing I said about 1,000 times in this interview is writers, you do not do this alone. You have to sit down and write, you know. A great friend of mine who was a therapist said the adult will never want to sit down, will never get the child to sit, you never want, the child will never want to sit down. But the adult can make the child and us sit down, and then the play can happen on the page. So you do have to sit down and find time to write, but you don't have to do it alone. You could write with other people. You know, you can even write with other people online. I do that sometimes. Like all we do is just write and say hello, but you need the community. I would almost say a writer support group more than even a critique book, because you want people that are going to give you feedback on your work, of course, and tell you, you know, because you know, we all need that. But you also want people that are going to help you value yourself and your work. When you have those moments where you that crisis of faith, you need somebody that's going to hold that faith for you. So writers don't have to like, and nobody does it alone. Even the Hemingways and all those people that, you know, and they just, you don't have to be, you know, you don't have to drink and be depressed and all that to be a writer. You can be a happy person, but it really helps to have people around you who like get you as a person and get your work, so that when they're giving you feedback, you can trust that what they're saying, you always agree, but you at least know that they're trying to get you to write the best book that you can write. And it's not about, you know, their own agendas. So I would say, don't do it alone. You don't have to do it alone. And that with writing this book, it's like, you don't give up. And if you have to put it away a while, put it away, but write something else and then go back to it, because sometimes, like, you know, we do have to grow into the people we need to grow into to be able to finish certain stories. But if I didn't have that friend, you know, Jim, that I mentioned earlier, and that friend Kate, and people like Marcia later on in life tell me to go back to that story, I may not have, right? So just find a writing community, I think, is what I was going to really say. So it would be the one thing I would tell writers. I mean, the answer to everything is always like, right, and get to your end of your draft, because we always think that we're only going to write that one book. So we think we got to put everything in it, or it's got to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just that first draft just has to be done, because then you can make it is the best thing that you can possibly make it. But if you don't have that first draft, it's really hard, because we'll write the first 50 pages over and over, and 9 out of 10 times you're going to have to cut those pages anyway. So you need people in your life to help you just And if you don't, that's great. But I think I do, and a lot of writers would do very well if you just find that community to keep it going. And I said the same thing 20 times because in a different way, because I really think that we don't do it alone. So find writer friends, find your writer family, I guess. In the theme of family, find your writer family and give to them as much as you want to get back, because it's kind of a two-way street.
That's such a great way to end the interview.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. This was great doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you. It was great talking to you. I asked so many questions that weren't even on my list.
Thank you. No, and and if you email me anytime if you have any other questions. It's not even with this interview, because I love talking to writers, especially aspiring writers, and it makes me very hopeful, because it's great to hear people even want to write anymore, right? And not just, well, that's one thing. I think people are writing more, but they're just calling it texting. All right. So thank you. This was great. And is this going to be on, do you do your interviews on the site, or, I know my mother's going to ask, so.
So I think a video format will be up on YouTube, and then a transcript will be up on the website.
Great. Okay. And can I just ask you, so how did this start? Bookmart.
Yeah. I'm just going to stop the recording.
Yeah, stop. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I realized, because it's part of
Yeah.